Bright Tuty. Every student matters.
So, after looking at the national and regional developments in India post-independence, now we look at the situation which remains in India post-independence when it comes to relations with neighboring countries. So, this is the topic 2 or the second topic in this chapter, which is titled India after independence, and here our focus will be on relations with neighboring countries. So, what kind of relations did India have with its neighbors or the countries which are its neighboring ones? So, India is the 7th largest country by geographical area. So, when we consider the geographical area, India ranks 7th, and it is the second most populous country and the most populous liberal democracy in the world. So, second most populated country is also India and the most populous liberated democracy in the world. So, these are the distinct features which India has. And India has a long coastline of over 7,000 kilometers bounded by the Indian Ocean on the south, the Arabian Sea on the west and the Bay of Bengal on the east. And we know India is a peninsula surrounded by water bodies in all its 3 sides, and it has a coastline of 7,000 kilometers bounded by Indian Ocean on the south, Arabian Sea on the west and Bay of Bengal towards its east. And India borders Pakistan to the west, China, Nepal and Bhutan to the north and Bangladesh and Myanmar to the east. So, these are the countries which are neighboring India in different directions. So, first we look closely at the relation which India shares with China. So, the Indo-China relations. India and China had relatively less political contact before 1950s. So, before 1950 there was very little political connections between India and China, especially because India was then under the foreign rule, and after 1950 there is extensive cultural contact. So, although there is very little contact between India and China before 1950, as far as political contacts are concerned, we see that there has been extensive cultural contact since the 1st century AD, especially with the spread of Buddhism from India to China. So, the cultural contact which India shared with China has been a long one, and it has a history which starts around 1st century AD, and it is especially related to spread of Buddhism from India to China. And in April 1954, India and China signed an 8-year agreement on Tibet that set forth the basis of their relationship in the form of Panchsheel Pact. So, the agreement which got signed between India and China in 1954 on the question of Tibet and the status of Tibet was then termed the Panchsheel Pact. Former Indian Prime Minister Narasimha Rao and Chinese Premier Li Peng signed the border agreement and 3 other agreements on cross-border trade. So, other than Panchsheel Treaty, we see that the Indian Prime Minister Narasimha Rao had also signed other border agreement with with the Chinese Premier Li Peng, and 3 other agreements on cross-border trade was also signed at this period. It emphasized on increased cooperation on matters related to environment. So, in these treaties, there was an emphasis on matters related to environment. And it was highlighted during Narasimha Rao's visit to Beijing in 1993. And this, to a large extent, helped in improving the Sino-Indian relation or the relation between India and China. And later in 1998, after the nuclear test which happened in India in 1998, the relation between India and China faced a minor setback. So, after this nuclear testing, the relation went a bit low, or it faced a minor setback. And when President K.R. Narayanan's visit to China in May 2000 marked a return of high-level exchange. So, whatever troubles had set up post the nuclear test in 1998, to a large extent was solved when President K.R. Narayanan visited China in 2000. And in 2017, it was an extremely difficult year for China-India relationship, with military tension in areas close to the disputed border, increasing competition in the neighborhood and growing strategic mistrust. So, since 2017, there has been difficulties or problems in the relation which India shares with China. There were disputes around the border areas, and there is also competition among these two countries, and also growing strategic mistrust is also one of the major problems which India and China relations are now facing. Sino-Indian relation increasingly stand at a crossroad with growing likelihood that they can go in wrong direction. So, now the situation is not very good, and we know the situation right now. There is a chance that the relations are not going in a good way or in a good direction. So, it is important that both the countries remain vigilant and try to solve the disputes which they right now have with each other. So, now we come to the relation between India and Nepal. India and Nepal share close ties, yet it is fraught or filled with. The word fraught means filled with difficulties stemming from geography, economics, and problems inherent in big powers, small power relations, and common ethnic and linguistic identities that overlap the two countries' borders. So, India and Nepal has very close ties, but it also has several problems which are geographical, economical, and other ethnical and linguistical issues. So, in 1950, New Delhi and Kathmandu initiated their relationship with the Treaty of Peace and Friendship. So, India and Nepal initiated a relationship with the Treaty of Peace and Friendship signed in 1950. It also accompanied letters that defined security relations between the two countries and an agreement governing both bilateral trade and trade transiting Indian territory. So, in this treaty, it also had letters that defined security relations and an agreement governing bilateral trade, that is trade between these two countries, and trade transiting Indian territory or trade which came in from the Indian territory or which was concerned with the Indian territory. And when it comes to India-Nepal relations, the open border between the two countries remain a unique feature of our relation. The borders are open, it is not restricted or closed. Frontier without restrictions has greatly facilitated the free movement of our people to each other's territories, and it has enhanced interactions, or it has helped in enhancing or improving the relations which people share between these two countries. Indian-Nepali relations appear to be undergoing still more reassessment when Nepal's Prime Minister Manmohan Adhikari visited New Delhi in April 1995 and insisted on a major review of the 1950 Peace and Friendship Treaty. So, in 1995, the treaty which was signed in 1950 was reassessed so that the relations could become more strong and peaceful. It sought greater economic independence for his landlocked nation while simultaneously striving to improve ties with China. So, this reassessment in the treaty meant that there will be more economic independence for Nepal, and the ties with China which Nepal had could also be strengthened. Furthermore, such visits have helped promote goodwill, trust and understanding and cooperation between two countries. So, most important is such visits have played a major role in improving the relations between the countries. Now, thirdly, we look at India and Bhutan. So, relations between India and Bhutan are governed by 1949 Treaty of Peace and Friendship. So, this is the treaty signed in 1949, termed the Treaty of Peace and Friendship. This treaty ensures India's neutrality in Bhutan's internal affairs. That is, India won't interfere in the internal affairs of Bhutan. And in exchange for Bhutan's agreement to be guided by India in foreign policy matters. But India will guide Bhutan in its foreign policy matters, and Bhutan should pay attention to those. But in practice, Bhutan exercises sovereignty on many issues. So, but it is not too binding on Bhutan, and Bhutan many times exercises its sovereignty or autonomous power on many of the issues concerning both foreign and internal affairs. India is Bhutan's largest donor and supplies approximately 80% of Bhutan's foreign assistance. So, India plays a major role by approximately supplying 80% of Bhutan's foreign assistance. In recent years, insurgents on Indian side of the border from the United Liberation Front of Assam and the Bodos have used Bhutan as a safe haven. So, those insurgents coming to attack India and creating disturbance in the border, like the United Liberation Front of Assam, it seems that they have used Bhutan as a place where they sustain themselves and plan such attacks on India. And Bhutan's military troops expelled insurgents from India. So, when Bhutan's government got to know about this, these insurgents or troublemakers were expelled from Bhutan. Through this joint effort with India, Bhutan strengthened border security and continued cooperation with Indian military. So, in such different ways, Bhutan keeps extending support to the Indian government and cooperates with the Indian military. Coming to the relations between India and Myanmar. So, we know Myanmar is a Buddhist country and it shares border with India in the eastern part, the eastern side. India has a tradition of close ties with Myanmar as both were once part of British India. So, it has a similar history of being part of British India. So, India has a strong bond or close ties with Myanmar. Both the countries share common history of struggle against British imperialism. That is where it has a common history of fighting against British imperialism. India and Myanmar have historical ties in the field of culture and religion as well. Along with this, it has several commonalities or similar features as far as culture and religion also. And in the recent past, both countries have been trying to increase economic cooperation. So, recently there are efforts taken by both the countries to improve economic cooperation. And there have been problems of illegal migration and smuggling between these two countries. So, one of the problems is illegal migration of people from one country to the other and smuggling of goods without following proper channels. This is a major problem faced by when it comes to India-Myanmar relations, and these problems have been resolved by diplomatic talks and meetings of top leaders, and to a large extent these problems are getting solved by the diplomatic and strategic talks which goes around between leaders frequently. And our late Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi had visited Myanmar in 1987 and started a new chapter of economic and cultural cooperation with this country. So, in 1987, the visit of then Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi was very significant, and Indo-Myanmar border trade agreement has also been reached between two countries. So, as different ways to strengthen the bond between these two countries, an Indo-Myanmar border trade agreement was also signed, and it has opened new avenues of trade cooperation in the fields like computers, machinery, banking, railways, telecommunication, etc. So, as a result of this trade agreement, new avenues of trade has opened in different fields, and we now look at the relationship between India and Pakistan. So, India and Pakistan, the two nations united by history but divided by destiny, have travelled a long way in an attempt to bring peace to the highly volatile valley or highly tensed relations which India shares with Pakistan. These are countries with common history but a divided destiny, but still efforts are going on from both the sides to keep the relation amicable. So, on April 1st, 1948, India stopped the supply of water to Pakistan from every canal flowing from India to Pakistan. In 1948, there was a decision taken by India to stop the water supply to Pakistan, and Pakistan protested, and India finally agreed on an interim agreement on May 4th, 1948. Following the protest of Pakistan, India had to come to an agreement in 1948. This agreement was not a permanent solution. Therefore, Pakistan approached the World Bank in 1952. Following the agreement in 1948, Pakistan approached the World Bank in 1952 for help in order to settle the problem permanently, because in 1948 the agreement was an short-term agreement or an interim agreement. Negotiations were carried out between the two countries through officers of World Bank. So, now World Bank became the mediator between these two countries. It was finally in Ayub Khan's regime, when Ayub Khan was the Prime Minister, that an agreement was signed between India and Pakistan in September 1960. So, in 1960, another agreement is getting signed between India and Pakistan with the World Bank as the mediator. And this agreement came to be known as the Indus Water Treaty. And this agreement, which gets signed in 1960, comes to be called the Indus Water Treaty. And along with this, Pakistan is locked in other territorial disputes with India such as Siachen Glacier and Sir Creek and Vellore project. So, here again similar to the water dispute, there are problems which India and Pakistan faces in the Siachen Glacier and Sir Creek and Vellore project. Pakistan is also currently having dialogue with India regarding Baglihar Dam being built over river Chenab in Indian administered Kashmir. So, the building of the dam over the river Chenab by India, there are also issues which Pakistan and India faces over this, and they are currently having dialogues with each other. And we see that in December 1971, following a political crisis in East Pakistan, the situation soon spiraled out of control in East Pakistan and India had to intervene. In 1971, the eastern part of Pakistan, there were several issues the people were facing and there were demands made from the side, and India had to intervene in this problem. The conflict, though brief, resulted in the separation of East Pakistan from Pakistan, and as a result of these issues, East Pakistan got separated, and backed by the Mukti Bahini and the Indian Air Force, the Indian Army compelled Pakistan to surrender and grant independence to East Pakistan, thus creating Bangladesh. So, this is how India intervened, and with the efforts of the Mukti Bahini and Indian Air Force, Pakistan was compelled to grant independence to the East Pakistan, which then gave birth to Bangladesh in 1971. And a conference of leaders of India and Pakistan was held in Shimla in 1972. After the 1971 war, both the countries mutually agreed to return the captured territories during the war. So, following the formation of Bangladesh in 1972, a conference is called between India and Pakistan, where both the countries decide or agree to return the captured territories during the war. Some improvements in the relations can be seen. So, there are some improvements which can be seen with the reopening of series of transportation networks near India and Pakistan border, with most important being bus routes and railway lines. So, improvement in the relations can be seen in the opening of transportation networks, and most importantly the buses which run and the railway lines which are now open between these two countries. So, both India and Pakistan have launched several mutual confidence building measures which are called CBMs, confidence building measures, to ease tensions between two. So, in order to improve the relations, they are also launched several confidence building measures, and it include more high level talks, easing visa restrictions and restarting of cricket matches. So, these include CBMs include high level talks, easing visa restrictions and restarting of cricket tournaments in order to create an atmosphere of trust and goodwill. The new bus service between Srinagar and Muzaffarabad has also helped bring two sides closer. So, this communication networks also improving plays a major role in strengthening the relations between India and Pakistan. In 1999, there was another conflict between two countries, which was the Kargil War, and Pakistan occupied some Indian territories near the line of control, that is the military control line between India and Pakistan, and India fought back and territories were taken back. So, the Kargil War, during then in Pakistan had occupied some Indian territories near the line of control, but post war India succeeded in taking back those territories which were annexed or occupied by Pakistan. And later, post Kargil war, came the attack at Pathankot in 2016, which is a recent incident, and this created a major setback in the relation. So whatever improvements were happening, everything remained unfulfilled, because again this attack on Pathankot was a major setback. However, despite all the initiatives, there exists an atmosphere of mistrust, because there are initiatives on one side to improve the relations, but alongside there are several other mishaps happening, which then again creates an atmosphere of mistrust. And therefore, we see that a lot more has to be done to develop a peaceful relationship between these two countries. So now we look at the relation between India and Bangladesh. So India and Bangladesh enjoys extensive and wide-ranging relations covering a number of areas of mutual interest. So it has a lot of extensive and wide-ranging relation with each other, and two countries have enjoyed traditionally close geographical, historical, cultural and ethnic ties. So what makes this bond strong is it has close geographical, historical and cultural ethnic ties with each other. And India follows a policy of expanding and deepening its friendly ties with Bangladesh on the basis of respect for each other's sovereignty and mutual benefit. So each other's sovereignty and mutual benefit is given importance by both the countries. Regular exchange of high-level visits take place between two countries, that is, people in leadership in both the countries frequently visit each other, and which underscores the importance attached by the leadership of the two countries to maintain ties and to promote mutual understanding. So this is done in order to promote mutual understanding between the countries. And former Indian Prime Minister Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee had visited Dhaka on June 1999, and among other engagements jointly launched with Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina the Kolkata-Dhaka bus service. So during Atal Bihari Vajpayee's visit to Bangladesh in 1999, he had inaugurated the Kolkata-Dhaka bus service. So now we look at India and Sri Lanka, another neighbor of India, that is Sri Lanka, and what kind of ties India shares with Sri Lanka. So India and Sri Lanka have high-level political exchanges and strong economic cooperation in diverse areas. They too have strong economic ties and also political exchanges. India's role in signing of the ceasefire agreement between the Sri Lankan government and the LTTE and the resurgence and revitalization of Sri Lankan economy are noteworthy. So the role India played in ceasefire agreement in an internal matter faced by Sri Lanka had been very noteworthy, because India's role helped in revitalizing Sri Lankan economy to a large extent. And India and Sri Lanka free trade agreement was signed in 1998 following these kind of support which India had given the Sri Lankan government when they were facing an internal problem. We see that in 1998 free trade agreement was signed between these two countries, which became operational from December 15, 2001. And India is committed to provide immediate duty-free concession on 10 to 12 items. So India also gives duty-free concessions to items which is exported to India from Sri Lanka. And a 50% person duty concession applied on 400 items which would become duty free in 3 years. So, these kind of concessions are given to Sri Lankan products, and efforts are also taken to have a defence cooperation agreement between both the countries. So, along with free trade agreement, we see there are efforts also to sign defence cooperation agreement between these two countries. So, we have looked at Indian relations with several of its neighbours, how it is, what are its specific features and characteristics. And now we come to non-alignment policy, which concerns with India's relation to other foreign powers. So, here first we will see what non-alignment policy stands for. So, when India became independent, there were two superpowers in the world, the USA and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic called the USSR. And to both these powers, India chose to be friendly but did not let either dictate terms to it. So, the decision of India was to be friendly to both these superpowers, that is USA and USSR, but it was clear that nobody will dictate terms to India. And this particular policy was called the policy of non-alignment. You are being friendly to all the nations, but you are not letting anybody to dictate or to tell what to be done. And now we see what kind of ties India had with Russia. In October 2000, former Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee and President Putin, that is President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, signed the Declaration on India-Russia Strategic Partnership. So, they signed the Declaration on the India-Russia Strategic Partnership, which was the first major political initiative after the collapse of USSR. So, after the collapse of USSR, it is in 2000 that India signs some kind of a treaty with Russia. And India always had friendly ties with USSR. So, in 1991, when the USSR collapses, so before that India had always very good ties with USSR. And they cooperated in trade and economic, technical, cultural and other fields. So, India and Russia had cooperated in several of this field, and India and USSR had similar views on many international matters. So, the views were also to a large extent similar when it came to international matters. The USSR supported India on issues like Kashmir. On the question of Kashmir and the problems posed by it, USSR had given support to India. The USSR helped India set up Bokaro and Bhilai steel plants. So, the steel plants established in India was done with the assistance of USSR, and the heavy electrical plants at Haridwar. So, this Haridwar where heavy electrical plants were established also had received lot of help from USSR. And it also supplied arms for the Indian forces at the time when USA was supplying arms to Pakistan. So, when USA was supplying arms or weapons to Pakistan, it was USSR which was helping India. Now, we look at the ties which India share with USA and what kind of relationship it was, and right now also how the relations are growing and evolving. So, by the turn of the 20th century, USA had become one of the strongest powers of the world, that is the superpower, and played a role in international affairs. So, by the 20th century, USA becomes a big power. When India was struggling for independence, it sympathized with and supported the struggle. So, USA to a large extent had supported the Indian struggle for independence. However, since then, Indo-US relations have been subject to fluctuation. So, post-independence, in the time period after independence, we see the relations which India has been having with USA is having a lot of fluctuation. There are many things which have happened between India and USA in this time period. During the Sino-Indian conflict or the Indian-China conflict, USA sided and supplied arms to India. When India was in war with China, we see that USA was supporting India. But the USA also gave military aid to Pakistan. But at the same time, they were also giving military aid to Pakistan, which was also in war with India. Their stand was that India was the aggressor during the trouble in East Pakistan. So, in 1971, the events which led to formation of Bangladesh, when India had intervened, USA was supporting Pakistan and was giving them arms and weapons because USA felt that India was the aggressor or India was wrong on its part to intervene in the affairs of Pakistan. There were many areas in which countries were not in agreement. The Kashmir issue was one such. So, when Russia was supporting India on the Kashmir question, USA was not supporting India on the way it was dealing with the question of Kashmir. And Pakistan became a member of CENTO, which was a military pact organized by the USA while India did not. So, this CENTO, a military pact under USA, Pakistan became a member, but India denied to be a member of this pact. And India refused to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, of which USA was the main sponsor. So, a treaty put forward by USA, which is the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, this too India refused to sign and be part of. A civilian nuclear deal was struck with USA in 2008. So, another civilian nuclear deal was then signed with USA in 2008.